Today we're going to be talking about self-care skills. These are really important not only at the elementary level, but all the way through the K-12 system and into transition programs. So we're going to be breaking down some of the important parts of how to teach things, what to look at, and then we're going to spend quite a bit of time today on toileting programs because it's such a big piece of what we do at the elementary level. But again, even at the secondary level, we might need to go back and work on some maintenance or generalization issues. So some topics for today is how to sequence eating, dressing, personal hygiene, toileting programs. There is a way to teach them that ensures that students are successful in picking up those skills. So there are some considerations in carrying out this kind of self-help instruction, if you will, is first of all, does the student have the potential to develop fine and gross motor skills necessary to perform the skills? We want to make sure that students can either use adaptive equipment or that they have some alternative performance strategies if they don't have those natural fine and gross motor skills. And then the other part is considering whether or not we should even consider the objective of partial participation. At the root of all of this is the idea that we want students and individuals with disabilities to live the most independent life possible according to their skill level. So for some students, that might be a partial participation. They may be able to be doing some of the skill, but not the entire skill. But every little piece that somebody can do for themselves really helps with a sense of well-being and a sense of self rather than a sense of helplessness. Some other things we want to think about is, does this student have an opportunity to perform the skill within regular, typical types of context? For example, is this student going to be able to practice toileting at home, or is the family going to put them in pull-ups when they get home? This is really helpful when we have the ecological assessment or coach interviews to get at what the parents really value and what they want to work on. And similarly, is what is the family willing to support or create opportunities? And is the instruction at school socially acceptable? So for example, we do see a lot of toilet training programs, we see a lot of feeding and maybe even some dressing because the students are using the bathroom and things like that. But not everything might be something that we want to do at school. For example, with first graders, if the parents say, I want my son or daughter to be able to make purchases out in the community, that's not something we typically do at the elementary level because none of their peers are doing that. So that might become negotiating with the family what's appropriate at school and then what are ways we can support those skill building activities at home. And then finally, can we use peers to provide this instruction in a natural setting? Of course, we would not do this during toilet training programs, but at the same time, things like leisure skills, game play, turn taking, those are great things to have peers involved in. Some other things to think about is historically, we have taught self-help skills from very easy to very hard sequencing. Now, the current recommendation is to focus on things that the student needs to learn in home, school, and community using that ecological approach. Again, that's why we do the interviews for this course. A good example of easy to hard sequence is the teaching research curriculum. It covers things like eating, dressing, and personal hygiene. Now, the skills are taught in order, and they're typically in an isolated massed practice format. But this is a great book. It's called The Teaching Research Curriculum for Moderately and Severely Handicapped. You can tell it's a little older based on the language, but really the focus that for these training programs really were out of the 80s and 90s. So you'll see one in class today, even though here we are much longer than that. The language is dated. You don't see these updated very often because we've moved on to focusing on things like academic skills and computer-related skills. The crux of these programs, again, were created 30 some odd years ago. So don't be offended by the language, but please do not pick it up either. Another one that's great, this is a newer research, a newer checklist. This is based off the ecological approach. This is Diane Browder and Fred Spooner. They do a lot in this area, so always look for things with their names on it. But this is where they've moved away from that easy to hard, and they're really looking at teaching things in typical routines, using distributed practice. So that means instead of 5 times at tying a shoe or sitting on the toilet for a long period of time, we're looking at, how often do kids use a toilet? When do they use a toilet? So those kinds of things have really evolved in the last 30 years. So then we want to consider also what are some of the strengths and weaknesses of each approach, and how could instructional procedures be modified to overcome weakness. Again, this idea of easy to hard, it makes sense in a lot of things, like, for example, teaching a kid to use a spoon for self-feeding. We want to work on pincher grasp and those small motor kinds of activities, and then get into the coordination of scooping and lifting and putting into the mouth without spilling. So easy to hard makes a lot of sense. One of the downsides to easy to hard is that we're always preparing students instead of actually working with them in those real life settings. That's where ecological comes in, where we identify what are the absolute essentials that the family and teachers are in agreement that this student should be working on at this point in time. So there's some benefits, pros and cons to both for sure, but looking at ways we can blend these might be important. So the way that we break these out, it doesn't matter what the skill is, but we conduct a task analysis. This is as simple as really looking at what are the steps that are required for the student to participate. For one student with higher level skills, those steps might be broad and big. And for another student who needs more concrete, smaller steps, there might be 30 steps that are really small and minute. So we're looking with the task analysis of watching the student try to complete an activity, doing most to least prompting, meaning that we provide as much support as they need. I apologize, let me go back. We're going to provide least to most prompting. So what we're trying to do is give them an opportunity to do the skill by themselves, and if that doesn't work, do the verbal hints work? If not, can some gestures work? If not, do they need prime, where you're touching their hands or guiding their elbows? And finally, if not, does it require full physical? That data then provides us a task analysis of how many steps they need, if we need to break something up into smaller steps, if they can successfully complete larger steps. That helps build our task analysis. We also look at, primarily with these skills, whole task or backward chaining. Whole task, where you're providing the level of support naturally throughout the entire task. Backward chaining is where we get them started with the first several steps, and then they complete the last step on their own. And then we help them with the first several steps, and they complete the last 2 on their own, so on and so forth, until they're building up that skill set right from the beginning. What this does is it builds up the opportunities they have to practice it correctly, as well as giving them a sense of achievement by wrapping it up and finishing it. So backward chaining is a really big deal, and whole task for smaller things is also useful. And then finally, we use time delay, system of most to least prompts, or graduated guidance. So we'll look at all of these, but time delay means that you have selected a specific number of seconds before you step in. The most common are 0, 3, and 5 second time delays. 0 for when a student is going to get the wrong answer, so you're jumping in right immediately. So for example, in an academic task, it would be, what color? This color is red. What color? And then allowing them to talk. So you're giving them the answer. That would be 0 second. 3 second gives them just enough time to really think things through, but not to become frustrated. And 5 seconds or higher are for people who have already understood the task and might just need to think about it for a minute to remember, or for a student that's just slower to pick up and initiate a skill set. We see that sometimes where a student can do something, they just need more time than most to begin the task. So with that, that is a very short PowerPoint presentation today because I want to show you a very specific toilet training program. Now, I am not going to take credit for this because this was created by Cindy Myers. She is an amazing educator. She was a classroom teacher and behavior specialist, and now she does a lot of consulting for the Salt Lake City School District. One of the things that she consults on a lot is the idea of talking about continence or toilet training programs, as we've called them in the past. This idea that so many of our students start school and they might not be developmentally ready to use to independently use the toilet till they're 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. I've even worked with students in the transition program from 18 to 22-year-old where we've had to come back and work on toilet training issues. So let's take a look. Just keep in mind these same skills. You're going to notice the whole most to least prompting, time delay, data collection, all of the pieces are really being brought back into this program. So that's one of the reasons I love it. So let's start with students with cognitive disability. Now, according to this protocol, students from very mild to very profound cognitive disability can indeed learn to use a toilet. But they do have to be ambulatory, meaning they have to have control over some of their body parts, for example. It does work for verbal or nonverbal students. They can have physical or orthopedic disabilities, including cerebral palsy or traumatic brain injury. Students with autism, this is very common for, and like I mentioned, students who have learned previously to use the toilet, but they have regressed and they're not being successful currently. Some things to caution or exclude from is, first of all, be very careful if a student has learned some fears and phobias. I've worked with students who have been morbidly afraid of the sound of the toilet flushing. They haven't liked to see the toilet evacuated, meaning flushed. That's very scary to them. They may have been toilet trained cruelly or, really sternly in the past. So we want to treat their fears first. So maybe before even beginning, you might do little things like conditioning that the bathroom is not a scary place, and so we're not even doing toileting things. We're going in and washing our hands and leaving, or we're just going in, staying for 2 seconds and walking out, and slowly building time. So you have to treat the fears first if they exist, and with older students they are likely to exist. Another thing is some children have medical conditions which doctors do not want to prescribe excess fluids or toilet training, which is a big part of this program, either because of their physical issues, like you see in the next bullet point, bowel and bladder issues that are beyond something they can control. It's neurological, but again, other students that having a lot of fluids might throw off medications. So you'll see here in just a minute there is a sign off for a doctor and a parent for very good reasons. And then finally, children under the age of 4 years, we typically want to be very careful with because these are, age groups at that point in time that families and care providers can be working on at home. Of course, if you're in a preschool program, this might be an area to focus on, but it's going to feel pretty clinical, where other kids in this age group are doing it very comfortably at home. So just something to think about and some exclusions to consider. Now, we know when a student is ready, whether they're 3 years old or 23 years old, when they're showing that they're not comfortable when they're wet or soiled, when their pants aren't clean. That's when you know a kid is ready. So this is how, in some ways very typical of even toddler training. Another idea is to consider that they can stay dry at least for half an hour if they're in some sort of diaper. So that means that it's not just, again, a neurological where the second there's urine, it's coming out, but instead that it can be held, just not for very long maybe. Again, the age, anybody over 4.5 years old, this really should become a priority. It is always amazing to me to see 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 14-year-olds still in diapers, because these programs actually do work. They're pretty incredible. And just for the dignity of life, we should always try to get students to have normalized behavior as much as possible. And then finally, this idea again of displaying no fears in being around or in the bathroom or using the toilet, and must, very importantly, again, look at doing some desensitization in order to get them past these points. Do not just think, oh, we'll never be able to do this. They don't like to wash their hands, or seeing urine or feces in a toilet scares them. Those kinds of things. It just means they need to be desensitized to it. So again, we want to look at getting a physician's exam to rule out that there's some sort of medical or physical cause that would make this not only a waste of everybody's time, but also pretty punitive if they don't have control over things. You also want to make sure that the parents are interested and ready, or that they've requested it. Doing something at school of this nature that's not reinforced at home is not going to be very successful. And then finally, make sure that if a student needs any kind of positioning, adaptive equipment, anything like that, that's addressed well in advance before beginning this program, so you have what you need. So if you have a kid that needs transition kinds of things from a wheelchair to the toilet, or some kind of bolster to sit upright, those are ready to go before trying. Again, our whole goal is trying to get rid of fears or not cause them in the first place. Again, this idea of prioritizing in a classroom. Now, these are students that have a million things on their plate. We're behind in academics most of the time. They have other functional skills. But for students who show multiple signs of readiness, this becomes a higher priority for things that we work on in the classroom. Again, students who stay dry longer, they become prioritized. Older students who show any sign of readiness, students with gross motor and adequate fine motor skills, those are students that are going to be much more likely to pick up these skills without a lot of adaptation, so that it becomes a priority that we can do quickly. And again, encouragement from home. So this is just a review of the things we're looking for to begin with, but if we're seeing any of it, it really should be prioritized. Okay, so here's the general philosophy here. The first one is we're going to increase fluid intake so we can maximize opportunities for practice. So as you know, the more often you carry around a water bottle, the more often you're going to have to stop and use the toilet. Versus those days we get really busy and we haven't even used the toilet all day. That can happen with students that aren't drinking a lot. So we're not only going to use natural thirst, we're going to create thirst. You'll see that here in a minute. And we're going to actually give fluids. This makes it possible for us to have maximum opportunities several times during the daytime that we can use the toilet successfully. We're also going to use a predetermined toilet-based schedule. So it might seem a little gestalt, if you will, but it works. It's the same thing as just over practice in some ways. But we're going to use a lot of positive reinforcement and absolutely no punishment. This is where you start hearing the jokes that are very serious about where you toilet trained harshly as a child. There can be a lot of damage done if things are not safe and if they're not pleasant. So we just absolutely no consequence, including, for accidents. I shouldn't say no consequence, but I should say no punishment. You'll see here what the consequence is for kids who have accidents, but it's very natural. Okay, so just so you know, this is coming from Fox and Nazarene. It's toileting procedure. And then the idea that, again, the home and the classroom's working together. They're both doing this. You're both on the same plan. You'll see forms in a minute where parents sign off on this and that they're going to try things. They're going to use the same data sheets. This is not going to be successful if we're just doing it at school. And then one of the wonderful things is we want this philosophy to embrace that we want to minimize stress to families and caregivers for training responsibilities. If you've ever toilet trained a child before, you know that it's a lot of time and energy, and it's serious commitment, and it's serious scheduling. And for some families, that can be really difficult. For example, if you have multiple children, if there's two jobs going on with a person, single parents, all of those kinds of issues can really be difficult. And so we want to minimize stress to families. And so you'll see, again, that the majority of this will fall on the school with quite a bit of support from the family. Okay, so let's get started. First of all, we're going to review and understand each procedure in the training protocol. You would train your assistants and others who will also be sharing these toilet training duties. So for example, you want them to know no punishment and all of that kind of stuff. So we're going to train ahead of time. And then when we're ready, we're going to schedule a conference with parents or guardians. The parent conference should really present a proposal to toilet train a student, provide a copy of the protocol so the parents can keep it and utilize it. We're going to explain the procedures so there's no miscommunication about what things mean. And we need to see, is this something we've got to add to a student's IEP goal, especially if they're going to be missing classes or this is going to impact progress. Putting it in the student's IEP goals really does give us permission to prioritize this over maybe some other things. There's so many things our students could work on. We're driven by the IEP, so toileting might be a big part of that IEP for lots of reasons. Now there's getting the parents' written permission. This is important, again, because you are talking about things that you want to be very careful of. Anytime a child is in the bathroom, you're dealing with private parts, kids are in various stages of undressing. You want to be really clear about what this looks like, written permission, who's going to be involved, all of that kind of stuff. Agreeing on a starting date and a review date. Talking about the terminology. For example, some people are really uncomfortable using biological real names for their different body parts. And so instead of saying penis, for example, a parent might say wee-wee or some other kind of name. It's really important to agree upon terminology so we're not confusing kids and we're also not stigmatizing it either. And then finally, there's a materials list, and you'll see that here, but we do expect parents to supply things like the pull-ups, the underwear, the wipes, those kinds of things. So that doesn't necessarily fall on the school. These are things parents would be using anyway. So here we go. This is our vocabulary list for toileting. So for example, what is urination called? What's defecation? What's the toilet called? Other things. So that would be where you'd put their private parts, for example. But most of the time for a 7-year-old, we don't say things like, do you need to defecate? But at the same time, we might not want to be using cutesy language either to talk about using the toilet. So we're just agreeing here, what are the words we're using? And the parent is giving permission to use toilet training procedures. Parent, teacher, and then an administrator signs and dates. Now, you can certainly vary this, but there's a good reason for using this list as is. But if you feel the need to update it, include additional language that might be specific for the situation or the student, that would be great. Okay, here's our materials list. This is pretty common. So for example, 6 pairs of conventional underwear, no pull-ups. Pull-ups are kind of this in-between safety net that a lot of kids get stuck in. And so what we're saying is kid is either dry or they're not dry, but we're going to be using methods that if they're not dry, they're cleaning themselves. So no pull-ups. We're taking away the safety net here. 3 changes of elastic waist, easy to manipulate pants. This is not the time you also want to be adding things like snaps and zippers and buttons and all of that stuff. There's a time and a place where we start talking about that for functional care skill, but not while toileting. These are, your basic, yoga pants or sweatpants. 2 to 4 changes of socks so we can have them on hand If a child has an accident, it will get the socks most of the time, so we want to get new socks. Washable, easy on, off footwear for the same reason. And then preferred liquids. For some kid, it might be Gatorade. For another, it might be apple juice. Try as hard as you can to stay away from beverages that really aren't healthy anyway. You don't want soda pop and all of that. But at the same time, you might have a student that's all they'll drink, and then that's okay. But if a student will drink water, switch out water and apple juice, but have the parents provide you with what they like, so they're not also, you're not trying to force chocolate milk down a kid who hates it. Then you're not going to be successful either. So we're also going to do a variety of preferred thirst-promoting snacks and treats. So those are things like pretzels, crackers, maybe popcorn for some kids. What are the things that make us thirsty? Another is a highly prized reinforcer to be used only for toilet training. So you'll see this in just a minute, but this is not something they can earn other times either. What we're trying to do is make toilet training really awesome and fun and rewarding. Another part is activities or items for entertainment while toilet sitting. So you're going to see that kids will spend a certain amount of time on a toilet. Are they going to read? Are they going to play on an iPad? I'm of the mindset that it should be something that could be easily washed. I just have some real weird hang-ups over the whole toilet thing. So things that could be thrown back at home into a bathtub or washing machine, or can be thrown in the washer, something like that. 2 washable chairs, again, the idea of clean up and support. Some cleaning supplies, maybe that's something we don't need the family to supply. Maybe that's something that's common in our classroom. Disposable diaper wipes and disposable gloves are big. Plastic bags and a timer. And pencil sheet, clipboard, and paper. Okay, so here we have a data sheet. We are going to look and see, you'll see an example here. You just build one yourself. Mark the data sheet as you go. There's a couple of things that we're looking at. Is one, how long does it take from the time that a student sits on a toilet till they actually go? That's called latency. And then the ability to remain dry until taken to the toilet. How long? Are they lasting 5 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour? You'll notice here we're not going to wait an hour, but how long are they able to stay dry? And then we're also looking to see if there's patterns of times that accidents or things, what's really successful. What are our patterns? Sometimes we see a lot of accidents happen around recess or lunchtime because a kid just doesn't want to take the time to go when they're going to miss out on their selection of activity or hanging out with friends. So pay attention to those patterns. Here's a common data sheet, so you can create your own, or you can print this out from the PowerPoint slides. But here you can see on the left-hand slide that right off the bat, student gets off the bus and they are given as much drink as they would like while sitting in their chair for 5 minutes. You're going to pay attention to how much that is. So for some students, they seem to have unquenchable thirsts. Sometimes they're on medicines that make them thirsty. And other times they barely take a couple of sips, or they never seem to want any. So we're going to let them just have 5 minutes to kind of relax and drink right off the bus. And then the next part is direct the student to the toilet using just minimal prompts. Again, we don't want them to become dependent on us saying, okay, time to go to the bathroom. The goal is kind of starting to recognize what the bowels are doing, kind of recognizing that need to go. So the third is directing the student to pull down their pants and use minimal prompts. So it's that undressing part. Now 4, if the student urinated, and see they use the term potty, which seems a little young, but if the student urinated, give them a reward and verbal praise while they're seated, then directed student to stand. This should tell you right now you do not want to use food reinforcers, in my opinion. Again, they're already going to get food and drink just to make it so that they have more opportunity. You don't want to be giving them gummy bears while they're sitting on a toilet. So, it could be a sticker, it could be, a high five, it could be lots of different things. The student then flushes the toilet, and then you're going to actually record when the urination is happening. So what you're paying attention to is, are they able to sit and go right immediately? Are they taking, several minutes? Now, if at 15-minute mark a kid has not been able to urinate, we're done. We're not going to keep making the kids sit on the toilet. We get up, we pull on the pants, we wash the hands, all of that kind of stuff. And then the student, we do dry pant checks every 5 minutes. So you can see we're on number 8 now. And their hands actually will touch and feel their own pants to make sure that they're dry. And then we're going to give an edible praise and fluid for dry pants. Okay. We're going to continue checking these every 5 minutes until a half-hour interval begins the chain again. So after 30 minutes, we're going to go and spend another up to 15 minutes on the toilet. Now, for kids that just are not letting go of their bowels, 15 minutes can feel like forever sitting outside the door or sitting in the bathroom with them. This pretty much has to be something you're committed to doing for several days in a row, as many as, usually 2 to 3, but it could be a little bit longer. It can be a long time, so bring something in to read for yourself, and that way it will keep you from getting all conscientious about time and starting to kind of bark at them to hurry up or something. We don't want to do that. Again, remember, it's just a positive experience. So we're doing this every half hour. Now, if wet pants occur, we're going to take the student to the toilet, take their wet clothes off, and again, we want them to do it. So we're not taking the clothes off, we're asking them to do it. We're going to let the student sit on the toilet until the next half-hour interval begins, the chain again, and they'll change their clothes. So that's as deep as the consequences we want to go, is for them to clean themselves up and to get a new set of clothes on. You might say something like, uh-oh, we didn't make it to the toilet in time, or uh-oh, we're going to try that again, but let's go ahead and get dressed. But certainly nothing that would be embarrassing, or, oh, you're kidding, or, oh, those kinds of things. They can be really damaging to kids. So our prompting strategies, everything should promote independence. We don't want them to become dependent on us saying or doing something. We want to use the least to most prompt hierarchy. This will ensure that we're not that we can do it quickly, that the student gets the level of support they need, but we start with the least amount necessary. If physical prompting is required, using graduated guidance, again, going that whole least to most with how much we touch a student. So for example, let's say that we are trying to help pull up the pants, as much as the student can do by themselves, and then we just do the parts that they're struggling with. Another idea is consider time delay prompting strategies for dressing skills. Give them a second to try and get their arms through the armholes, or their pants up past the waist, or their underwear on first before the pants. Give them a second and again, promote independence with this. Okay, so here's a typical 30-minute interval. Again, this is going to depend deeply on what it looks like in your classroom. But let's say that a bus arrives or the parents drop off. Around 8 o'clock, the student gets into the class. We're going to go 5 minutes to encourage fluid intake. And then from 8 to 8:15, we're going to go and sit on the toilet, maybe look at some books, sing some songs. That's going to be up to 15 minutes. Clearly, if they urinate after 5 and they're done, great. Let's get off the toilet and then we're good for a while. From 8:15 to 8:30, we're going to do dry pant checks. So sitting on a chair face-to-face with the trainer. Again, can be looking at blocks, playing with toys, looking at books and playing with toys, and then checking every 5 minutes until 8:30. Notice one thing you're not seeing is the whole idea of leaving the bathroom. So this can take some organization. Not all classrooms have a bathroom built into the classroom. They might be down the hall. So in something like this, where you have an adult and books and maybe even toys in a bathroom, you might want to see about using an out of order sign for a couple of days, talking with your administrator in the gen ed or other sped teachers in that area so they know that the bathroom's going to be out of order, so that these kids can get that practice. Now, if success occurs, again, high reward, lots of praise, a prized reinforcer while still on the toilet. This will help decrease anxiety about the whole toilet issue anyway. With the least amount of prompting necessary, help the student make sure they get up, pull on their pants, walk to the chair, and then begin the dry pant check every 5 minutes, again, until the next half hour. And you're starting this over every half hour. It seems intense, but keep in mind, if these kids did not need intense direction, they would have toilet trained by themselves already under natural circumstance. So these kids need this intensity. Now, if an accident occurs, you want to keep very calm and very neutral. And your informational feedback is very, bland. Your pants are wet. You need to use the toilet. And even just saying that, it sounds a little aggressive coming from me. So something like, oh, your pants are wet, we need to go use the toilet, or you need to go use the toilet. Direct the student to the toilet using the least amount of prompting necessary. Again, the goal is keep them as independent as possible. So the student's going to go and take their clothes off, sit on the toilet, pick up their wet clothing, putting it in a bag. You want to stay hygienic through this whole process. And then the adult is cleaning the area. You want to remain neutral, and that can be difficult for some people, especially if there's feces involved. But the reason the adult is cleaning up the area is it's purely hygienic at this point in time. We want to make sure that we're not passing around illnesses because we've made a kid clean up feces, for example. Now we're going to begin a new training interval every half hour again, so it doesn't change anything. We don't just give up for the rest of the day because that was a moment that didn't work. So the dry pant check, you can see why you need additional chairs. Student and trainer sits on chairs in the bathroom or just outside the bathroom door. Trainer sets the timer for every 5 minutes. When the timer rings, trainer prompts student to lightly touch underwear in the crotch area, optional, and verbally reinforces dry pants. Touching the crotch area might not be appropriate for many students. Particularly if we're also working on students keeping their hands to themselves. Perhaps they are already touching themselves too much. That might not be appropriate. And you can see just with this why we want this in another room outside of the traditional setting. You don't want a kid being touched in the crotch or touching themselves in the crotch in front of a bunch of other kids. So trainer gives desirable thirst-promoting treat along with a verbal, social, positive reinforcement. So in this case, Cheez-Its. Cheez-Its seem to be a very thirst-provoking, popular treat. And then we're going to go ahead and set a timer, another 5 minutes, do a pant check. After 2 days, well, there's no accident at the training bathroom at the school, the students are going to bring back to the classroom and continue half-hour training intervals. Accidents are going to be happening, so be prepared to clean them up. But you can see that 2 days straight in a bathroom. So you can work on other things. You can bring in some academic tasks. You can do some instructional programming. But you want to be really careful because the guide is that you want to only do pleasant tasks within the bathroom, so, and even in the classroom. So this should be easy, familiar work tasks, no new learning, because at that point in time, now we're doing something I hate and pairing it with something I hate. So you don't want to put those two together. Similarly, in the bathroom, these academic tasks should be something they've liked, like, an iPad ABC game that reinforces maybe some other reading and writing things we're doing, but nothing that would be hard, nothing that would be challenging, because then it just becomes a super horrible experience for the kid. Toilet training, even in the classroom, once we've had those no accident days, it's still the main focus of what we're doing. So you've got to be prepared to walk away from whatever else you're doing to do the 5-minute pant check and the 30-minute toileting checks. Then we want to start increasing the time between our toileting trips, because most people do not go to the bathroom every half hour. What we've been training up to this point is just the student recognizing what it feels like to get a full bladder. So when our data stabilize that a kid can go half an hour, we're going to discontinue the fluids. So this is going to give us less opportunity, but it becomes more natural. The students go to the toilet every half hour because we don't want to increase accidents. We're going to decrease dry pant checks, so we're not going to do it every 5 minutes. We're also going to decrease reinforcement based on what our data is saying. Kids get sick of even their favorite things when it's given all the time. So we're going to decrease that. And after more than 3 days of no accident, we're going to begin increasing toileting schedule as appropriate. So we're looking at things like after 2 weeks, we should be at 1.5 hour intervals, and the toilet goes on a class schedule. So every other kid is going to the bathroom at recess and before lunch. And we're looking to really get to that level of natural toileting time. At this point in time, notice how much now has been done at school. At this point in time, we're going to generalize it to home. So we're going to meet with parents and review the progress at school. We're going to ask parents to start at the 1.5 hour interval. We're going to talk about using social praise and small edible treats. We're going to also make sure that we are no longer in pull-ups and diapers, even at night. And we're going to talk about that it is okay to use diapers in social situations or outings where we don't have a lot of control. The goal is to avoid the embarrassment of an accident after this point in time. So if we know that a parent is going on, a camping picnic kind of thing, we're going to be away from toilets for a couple of hours, and they might just have access in the woods. Yeah, it totally makes sense to use a diaper or a pull-up at that point in time. Or shopping in the mall where you might have limited access. We're going to see what's typical for the family and say there are times, if a diaper is absolutely necessary, for example, on a large car ride, that's great. But generally speaking, don't do it at night and don't do it on a regular basis. So let's talk now about students with maybe some more significant issues and see how that changes. So now we're talking about multiple and profound disabilities. So we're adding physical nature into this equation here. So it does turn out that kids with a lot of physical disabilities, including cerebral palsy, can still do this. Students who use wheelchairs can still do this. And students, again, who are verbal and nonverbal still can do this. The cautions and exclusions are similar. Students who have neurogenetic bowel and bladder programs, we might want to exclude them because they're doing something else specific to their needs. And we also want to be careful with spinal cord injuries. Spinal cord injuries mean that the kid is not aware of the fillings of their bowels. And so the toileting program may not be appropriate. So paraplegia, quadriplegia, and spina bifida, these might not be the students that will benefit from this program. So again, the determining readiness starts at the same time. We want to maintain the diaper for half an hour, dry, 4.5, no fear around the bathroom. But notice this addition. We want to make sure there's a communication system in place for kids that are nonverbal, so that they can ask for things, so they can explain what's going on. We want to make sure something's in place. Some other things is we want to consult with a physical therapist about what positioning things might be needed, if there's any specific considerations for transitioning a kid, how do we support and transition to the toilet. These are not necessarily the folks that are going to be 100% independent for using the toilet, but our goal is always maximum independence. And so even just a student being able to use a toilet instead of having somebody take off a diaper and wipe them, just imagine the increase in privacy. If somebody needs to sit me on the toilet and then they can walk away, that's going to feel a whole lot better to me than having somebody wipe and clean me. So the goal with these guys might not be 100% independence, it might be partial participation. So then you see weight bearing. Can a student put weight on their legs to pull up their pants? And if not, again, we can help them. What adaptive equipment issues need consideration? Do we need handlebars for them to hold on to in and around the bathroom? Do we need, the little potty seats over the big toilet? Those kinds of things. And then what's specific to the student? We want to address any of these issues before beginning. General philosophy, again, is tracking the child's natural schedule and start predicting when the episodes of elimination are likely and toilet the child around those times. That's our big goal. Use positive reinforcement. Again, no punishment. Training occurs in the classroom and then is generalized at home. And once again, it minimizes stress to the families. We want to use consistent signals or communication mands to develop relationships between action and consequence. So this might be sign, this might be some sort of PECS picture, it could be a signal in a word, but we're trying to teach students what is about to happen without surprising them. We don't want to seem like, we don't know why we're in the bathroom all of a sudden. And then finally, using routines and environmental stimuli to elicit appropriate toileting responses. Again, most kids are very comfortable knowing that right before lunch, right after recess, we're using the bathroom. Making toileting a routine for kids, again, with more significant and multiple disabilities, it might not get to be the point where they feel they need to go to the bathroom, so they have to learn to make it a routine. So let's analyze the steps for which a student needs to toilet. Again, for one student, it might include taking down the pants, pulling them all the way down below the knees so they don't get wet, sitting down, spreading legs. For another student, that might just be one step, is sit on the toilet, and they automatically know, okay, I've got to pull my pants down and get them out of the toilet. So you might not need to write all 5 steps for one student, and yet for another student it might be 10 steps. So just really analyze the steps needed for them. Develop a routine or procedures and be consistent. Consistency is probably the golden rule for toileting and for really anything. And then, once again, a standard presentation of environmental or artificial stimuli that steps into the toileting chain. So if I hold up a picture or I'm using the sign for toileting, it just becomes a really constant that the student can expect. Communication systems. Let's evaluate the communication needs of a student. Not all of the students will have these pre-programmed pieces on their devices that talk about toileting and dressing, and so we might need to add some of those. Once again, let's make a list of vocabulary, signals, mands, all of those things around toileting. So here's some examples. Moving to the work area, lifting, undressing, urinating, defecating, finished, hygiene, all of those things we may need to program into a communication system or add pictures for. Getting started, you'll see that these are the exact same as with our previous group of students. Getting started, once again, almost identical, except we're going to agree on maybe not the vocabulary, but the signals and communication, so the students can see that this is the same at home and at school. Here's our vocabulary list. This is another one. You can use these. Communication mands and cues. Once again, we're trying to get them to be independent, so we're going to maybe raise our hands to show lifting. We're going to do a thumbs up, thumbs down to show up and down, toileting, all of those things. We're going to talk with the family so that we're not doing something that might be offensive to the student, and so that it eliminates confusion between the two settings. Here's our permission form. You can see that this one is just typed directly into PowerPoint, so you can create your own, or you can use this if you want. Now, the physical therapist, just from the picture alone, you can see the toy is attached to the bars. And there's a smaller seat established. There's a seat belt that's been put on. So this would be a student that has some mobility issues for sure. So the potty chair commode adaptations, seat and safety belts, positioning, head and trunk support. In this one, you have a trunk support with that blue belt. Wall bars for holding, transitioning to and from the toilet, and something specific, what happens if a student has seizures or they have uncontrollable body movements. What's the plan? So considering those so that there's no injury. Now the materials list looks the very same. What are the entertaining items? What are those recommended by a physical therapist? And then all of the things that you need. Data sheets, we want to see both baseline and marking at those half-hour intervals. You can see here where we're actually writing, are they dry, are they wet, or are they soiled, so that we get a really good idea. By the way, again, this is baseline, meaning that we aren't really doing anything to induce, but we're looking before we even start training, when are the likely times that the child needs to urinate and defecate, because that's where you would put your effort in. If we know that the student's going to have a bowel movement right after lunch, that would be the time that we're preparing for training in that. Look for trends or patterns in dry diapers as well as when they're using the toilet. So your data sheet might look like this. Again, you're just checkbox marking, are they dry, are they wet, or are they soiled? So maybe they're wet and soiled at 10 o'clock in the morning. So this would be a week's worth of data, so very easy to use. The second data sheet is your actual program data, meaning that you are doing something. So similar to the previous, the baseline, you have dry, wet, and soiled, but you also have indicate if the student urinated, had a bowel movement, or no production while on the toilet, and review to confirm how accurate that high probability schedule was. So this looks very similar. You can see here you are going to talk about the diaper status that's here, dry, wet, and soiled, and toilet success. Now we're on the toilet, we're doing these things. Were they able to do one of these? All right. So the training, very similar. The difference between this group of students and the previous group of students is rather than the whole every 5-minute dry check and every 30 minutes, we're doing this based on the high probability schedule that was identified in baseline. We're being consistent and we're using techniques to transfer. And then if success occurs, you'll see it's very similar. High reinforcers. The minute that they do use the toilet, we want to remove them from the toilet, put on a clean diaper. These are kids that are going to be diapered because they have more significant needs than, and they're more likely to have accidents, so we don't want to do the cleanups. The goal is, again, to teach them to pay attention to their bladders and bowels rather than in the other group, it was teaching them to use the bathroom more often so that they can be successful. We're going to return the student to the regular program, mark data sheets, and during the next time that's high probability, like again, maybe we've determined every time this child eats or drinks, the probability is really high, so therefore we're going to do a toileting session at that point. Notice this is not as many opportunities as our previous group. These are students that are going to take longer to get into the bathroom, get them on the toilet, get them off the toilet. So 30 minutes wouldn't make as much sense as just identifying what the high likelihood time is. Now, if nothing happens once you set them on the toilet, you can leave them on the toilet for up to 15 minutes, but then pull them off. You don't want the toilet to become a horrible place to be. Return them back to what they're regularly doing, and then wait a half hour and do it again. And then this is the point where you can do the every half hour and then return back to the high probability schedule. So this is not, it's similar to the other one where it's the every half hour schedule, but again, that every half hour schedule only gets prompted within the high probability time periods. Now, if a kid ends up having a wet or soiled diaper within that time frame, again, very informational. You just tell them their pants are wet and we're going to go use a toilet. We're using the toilet for up to 15 minutes. If elimination occurs again on the toilet, go ahead and treat that as a success and then remove them. Either after they go or after 15 minutes, whichever one happens first. The goal is you don't want them to start recognizing like, oh, if I go in my diaper, I don't need to go sit on that toilet. They just recognize that we're going to go do that anyway. So let's do it before it becomes problematic because now I've also got to get a new diaper and I'm very uncomfortable. Now, making sure that there's always a clean diaper so that it's reinforcing to go. Returning the student back again to original and continuing the high probability scheduling. Right here, you're seeing an adaptive chair where a commode goes under it, so that, and the student's in a harness. Again, you might wonder, as somebody who doesn't struggle with toileting, you might wonder, what is the point to all of this? Look how much help they need. But in reality, that whole dignity of life, like I mentioned before, even being able to do some of the steps by yourself and having a few minutes of privacy to use the toilet is a lot better than having somebody cleaning you constantly. Now, generalizing to the home, when students successful at urinating more than 75%, we're going to go ahead and generalize to the home. Meeting with the parents is going to be necessary, and discussing what adaptations are necessary at home, and then helping parents locate resources and equipment. This can be a little more difficult. UCAT does quite a bit of stuff with adapting equipment, but you might find other things through the medical profession, having them talk with their doctor throughout this process to see what some resources might be for them. Providing parents with these data sheets so they can track wet and dry, so that they can establish their own high probability. I may not have said this before, but when we're tracking wet and dry for the baseline, this is without putting them on the toilet. This is just dry. This is diaper check. So it's not the toileting being added on while we're just trying to identify high probability. And then at that point in time, again, we're checking about every half-hour intervals so that we can identify where the student is most likely to use the restroom. Then, similar to what we've been doing at school, the parents are going to identify that schedule. Then they're going to do the 15-minute increments of toilet setting around that high probability schedule. They're going to be giving rewards and a lot of verbal reinforcement. And then, of course, put the student in a normal diaper and go on with the regular activities. Similar to what we did at school, if if an accident occurs, have the parents learn to clean the student, then place them on the toilet for 15 minutes, and treat the success as a win. And same thing, use the highly desired reinforcer, put them in a clean diaper, and they should continue wearing clean diapers between toilet trips and at night until toilet use is well established. All right, so this is the big ideas for today. Double check and see what the major activities for today are. It's again a lot of pulling out some of these ideas, putting them together for yourself. But I love this resource, and this might be something you want to consider downloading and adding to your own personal webpage. This is like liquid gold, so much so that we have put it again on the Council for Exceptional Children's webpage so that people all throughout Utah can have access to it. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to give me a call and check in with me. Talk to you soon. Bye.